Angelo Roberts did not drink or take drugs, but somehow the drugs made him rich. He studied martial arts, bought ice cream for the children in his housing project, and told them to stay in school and away from the gangs. Meanwhile, the man was secretly running one of the most violent crack operations on the west side of Chicago, which he inherited it from his father-in-law, Walter Wheat. When Wheat was shot dead in the summer of 1994, no one could agree on who killed him, and with Roberts' success in the gang, a lot of people had nowhere else to point but at him. Did the disciplined protege have the old king killed to keep the throne? The Four Corner Hustlers began on the west side of Chicago in 1968 on a small piece of West Garfield Park. Their founders measured in corners. In their first years, they stood for almost nothing the public would later attach to the name. The founder, Walter Wheat, banned his members from dealing drugs, banned them from using drugs, and held the gang to a hard code of discipline. Wheat built the organization with a man named Fred Gage, and the two of them came out of a lineage the streets called a royal bloodline, a family line that ran back to the original vice lords of the 1940s. Wheat carried the title of chief. Gage carried the title of king. The rules were plain: no selling, no using, no marijuana, no drinking into a stupor. The Four Corner Hustlers were a fighting gang, and the only violence the code permitted was aimed at rivals who stepped into their corners. That version of the gang held for close to 2 decades, mostly because the city around it had not yet handed those corners the kind of money that erases rules. By the late 1970s, a new order was forming in the Illinois prison system, where the heads of Chicago's gangs split the entire map into 2 alliances, people and folks. The Four Corner Hustlers came down on the people side, bound tighter than ever to the vice lords, whose blood ran through the founding family. Their oldest enemies were vice lord factions that had once been kin. Their largest enemy across the city was the gangster disciples. That alignment would outlive every man who said it. By then, the gang had already grown far past the 6 square blocks it started on. The Fours pushed west into Austin in 1968 and became known there as the Macketeers, claiming a stretch of the neighborhood from a section called Capitol Hill to the corridor along Chicago Avenue they called L-Town, both of which stayed strongholds for decades. When the people and folks alliances hardened at the turn of the 1980s, the Four Corner Hustlers used a long-running conflict with the Southside's El Rukins, fought partly inside an old downtown theater where gang members gathered to watch gangster films as a gateway onto the South Side, and vice lords and fours began moving through Roseland and beyond. The reach stretched past Illinois entirely. As early as 1981, a member carried the gang to Canton, Mississippi, which became the capital of a southern wing, and a woman named Fannie Mae Chambers, tied directly to Wheat and Gage, drove the drug trade down Interstate 55 and taught it to a new generation of young men. The organization Roberts would one day inherit was already a machine with branches in several states. The founders were violent men long before crack reached their corners. On Valentine's Day in 1972, Fred Gage and Walter Wheat were at a church dance on the west side when a police officer working the door told Gage to leave for arriving without an invitation. The confrontation ended with the officer shot 3 times in the face and neck as another Four Corner Hustler opened fire, and Gage and Wheat wrestled him to the ground. The officer survived surgery. Gage drew a 10-year sentence for the attempted murder of a police officer, and the gang lost its king to prison. Gage never made it back. In late 1983, the day before his release, he drank bad moonshine and died at 29. 5,000 people came to the funeral, and the line of mourners shut down a lane of traffic on Chicago Avenue. The newspaper that covered it called him a conservative vice lord leader and never mentioned the Four Corner Hustlers at all. The gang that would soon flood the west side with crack was still invisible to the world beyond the street. Wheat went away in 1975 on an assault case and spent more than a decade inside. With both founders gone, the fours who stayed out drifted toward the money. The 1968 rules forbade, and the heroin trade took hold in Austin first. A Chicago police officer later testified that he had watched the gang's drug operations around Madison and Menard for 18 years, a span that began the same year Wheat went to prison. By the time crack spread across Chicago in the second half of the 1980s, the old discipline survived only as a memory carried by men who no longer ran anything. The man who broke it open was Monroe Banks. Banks carried his own history of violence into the role. He had gone to prison after serving as the lookout in a 1977 robbery that left a man dead in the heart of the gang's Austin stronghold, and he came home from a 10-year sentence in 1987 with one ambition: to turn the Four Corner Hustlers into a crack operation that could pull in millions. The South Side belonged to the gangster disciples who already ran crack there. On the west side, the vice lords ran heroin, and the crack market sat wide open. Banks moved to take it. Wheat objected. Many of the original members objected, and the code they had written in 1968 said everything about why. Banks won anyway. Wheat was forced to step down, Banks took the nation, and within a year he cut the fours loose from the larger Vice Lord alliance and built a symbol of his own, a black diamond with 4 points he named love, hate, kill, and take. That break carried a personal edge that would haunt the gang for years. Part of Banks' reason for cutting away from the Vice Lord alliance was a man he wanted dead, someone tied to Willie Lloyd of the unknown Vice Lords. Banks visited Lloyd in prison and asked permission to make the kill. Lloyd told him to wait until his release. Banks refused to wait, moved anyway, and reopened a war with the unknowns that traced back to 1968. That war would outlive Banks and settle eventually on Angelo Roberts. By the late 1980s, the west side of Chicago ran on the housing projects and the corners around them. Henry Horner, Rockwell Gardens, Maplewood Courts, and the high-rises near them held thousands of people, and the crack trade turned their stairwells and lobbies into markets that never closed. On the same west side, the fours shared and contested ground with conservative Vice Lords, with the insane and mafia branches of the Vice Lords, with the unknown Vice Lords who had hated them since the founding, and across the city with the Gangster Disciples and the Black P. Stones. Every block that moved crack was a block someone else wanted, and the money the trade produced made the old prohibition against it, look like a relic. Into that map, Banks pushed an operation the founders had spent 20 years swearing they would never build, and he needed soldiers to run it. He found them in the Henry Horner homes, where a young man named Angelo Roberts was running with a gang called the Gangster Stones. Roberts had married into the founding family. In 1987, he wed Walter Wheat's daughter and started a family with her, which made the chief of the Four Corner Hustlers his father-in-law. He left the Gangster Stones, joined the Fours, and went to work bringing crack into Henry Horner by flipping his old Gangster Stones into the new operation. The Fours took the high-rise at 1936 West Washington Boulevard on the corner of Washington and Damen and turned it into a market. Everything about Roberts cut against the trade he was building. He came up under the mentorship of an uncle, a Vietnam veteran whose grasp of discipline and combat ran deep enough that the legends around him suggested special forces. The uncle taught him martial arts, and Roberts trained in Aikido, Wing Chun, and Japanese karate until the West Side believed no one in Chicago could beat him in a fight. One story had him wading into a brawl among Black P. Stones inside Henry Horner and putting down 20 of them, knocking men out cold while ordering them to stop. He refused drugs, he refused alcohol, he bought ice cream for the children in the projects and told them to stay in school and keep away from the gangs. He fought police hand to hand when several officers tried to take him at once, and an old video that still circulates shows him trading blows with 4 or 5 of them. On the street, he was feared and respected in the same breath. Roberts' place in the family went deeper than the marriage. Walter Wheat took to his son-in-law, saw in him the discipline the old code demanded, and began grooming him to one day run the nation. While other young Fours wanted the fast money and the loose rules of the crack era, Roberts carried himself the way the founders had in 1968, and Wheat invested in him for exactly that reason. The man who would later be accused of having Wheat killed was, by every account of these years, the heir Wheat chose on purpose. The first death tied to his name came in early 1988. Police found Stephen Edwards beaten to death behind a Jewel grocery store on West Grand Avenue, his body bound with torn bed sheets, his chest cut, his lungs stabbed. Edwards had been a drug addict living in the basement of a building deep in the original Four Corner Hustler territory, and the murder traced back to that basement. The case fell on Eugene Royney, a co-founder of the Fours, who first claimed he had only stepped in to break up a fight and disciplined Edwards with a pipe, then admitted he had killed the man and staged it to look justified. Angelo Roberts had been in that basement. By the account he and Royney gave, the two of them came downstairs to stop a fight over how to split a batch of cocaine and heroin. When detectives questioned Roberts, he said nothing. He used his Fifth Amendment right and refused to testify against Royney, and he walked away from charges of concealing a homicide and unlawful use of a weapon. Royney went to prison for life. Roberts went back to the streets with a reputation as a man who would not snitch, and to an organization built on loyalty, the reputation was worth more than anything he could have bought. The violence around Roberts kept climbing. In July 1990, as officers walked out of a Henry Horner building on West Lake Street, gunfire caught Detective Clarence Longley through his right hand. Longley survived. Roberts was suspected and, as he had in 1988, avoided a conviction. Police would later count him a suspect in the shooting of an officer in 1990, a charge that, like the others, never held. Each case that failed to stick fed the same legend: a man the law could not hold and the street could not beat. The crack money, meanwhile, had grown into something the founders never imagined, and then it turned on the man who brought it. In August 1991, Monroe Banks was shot to death while he stood watching someone try to coax a cat down from a tree, killed by a member of the Black Souls, a gang the Fords had treated as family for more than 20 years. The reasons traced back to disputes over drug profits. The war did not spread. Walter Wheat stepped back in and held the nation through the rest of 1991. But the 1990s were a hard time to run an organization built on 1968 rules, and the new generation wanted things the old code refused. Wheat spent that period preparing his son-in-law to take over. Roberts kept colliding with the law as he waited, back in custody by September 1991, part of a pattern that would define his reign. For most of the time, he led the Four Corner Hustlers. Angelo Roberts was behind bars. In 1992, with Wheat's blessing, Roberts took the nation at 22 years old. Wheat could not have predicted what his son-in-law would do with it. Under Roberts, the Four Corner Hustlers expanded in every direction at once. He flipped the majority of the gangster stones in Henry Horner into fours and turned the project into one of the gang's strongest markets. Rockwell Gardens grew into a stronghold. The Fords took over the Maplewood Courts projects. Crack ran through Henry Horner and Rockwell around the clock, and the trade became a multi-million-dollar operation. The empire ran on alliances the gang had spent years building. The Four Corner Hustlers and the Black Souls had marked themselves solid, a word for the bond between them, and Banks had turned the points of the Black Diamond into the gang's law. In 1988, inside Rockwell Gardens, a traveling vice lord leader known as Minister Shotgun sat down with a Four Corner Hustler named Duncan to formalize how tightly their two operations would run, and the double solid concept spread out of the project from there, locking the drug business of the Fords and the traveling vice lords together. Roberts presided over that world at its peak when the high-rises moved crack day and night and the money climbed into the millions. Beneath him, the single organization broke into factions, each with its own territory and its own name. Raymond Betts, known on the street as Shaky Sean, built an enforcer crew called the Body Snatchers in Austin in 1992 and earned the title of Prince, his operation pulling in $10,000 a day before he landed in the TAM Supermax in 1994. In North Lawndale, the Syndicate Fords formed the same year. A later account placed their drug sales at $9,000 a day, described members getting Superman tattoos, and traced their heroin supply to Mexican cartels, and the crews that simply called themselves Angelo's Fords. When two Puerto Rican brothers in Belmont Cragen asked Roberts for a branch of their own, he granted it, and the Spanish Four Corner Hustlers spread through the northwest side. The reach went past the city. Fords appeared in Uptown and West Ridge in the suburb of Bolingbrook, and for a stretch in the late 1990s, they counted white and Hispanic members in Romoville. This spread surprised even people who knew the gang. A West Garfield Park outfit that began as 6 square blocks now had crews on the far north side in white and Hispanic neighborhoods, and in suburbs an hour from the city. Under Roberts, the Four Corner Hustlers stopped being a neighborhood and became a network. Members commuted in from the suburbs to work the corners. The Fords held Henry Horner, Rockwell Gardens, and the Maplewood Courts projects at once, 3 markets feeding the same operation, and the cash that came back turned a West Side street gang into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Roberts sat over all of it and did it without touching the product his soldiers sold, his discipline holding even as the operation under him swelled past anything the founders had built. The bigger the operation grew, the more enemies it made. In 1989, a new vice lord power, the Mafia Insane Vice Lords, absorbed several older vice lord groups in a single stroke and inherited a rivalry with the Fords that ran back to 1968. The fight was deadly from the start, driven by control of the heroin trade in the Austin streets, and it never cooled. The older feud with the unknown vice lords came back to life through Roberts himself. Their leader, Willie Lloyd, had argued with Roberts while both men were in prison, and after Lloyd was released at the end of December 1992, the relationship collapsed into shooting within weeks. In January 1993, unknown vice lords opened fire on roughly a dozen Four Corner Hustlers, and the two gangs hardened into permanent enemies. None of the growth changed how Roberts carried himself. He still trained, still refused the product his soldiers sold, still spoke to the children in the projects about staying out of the life he ran. The discipline the founders wrote into the gang in 1968 lived on in him, while the gang itself became the opposite of the thing they built. A sober martial artist sat at the head of a crack empire, telling kids to stay in school while running the corners they would have to walk past to get there. He ran much of this from a cell. A major Chicago police raid on his operations put him in prison in 1992, and he stayed there until June 1994. The video of him fighting 4 or 5 officers belongs to this stretch of his life, a man who would not go quietly even when the outcome was certain. The strangeness of it was that the gang grew while its leader sat behind glass. The factions ran themselves, the markets kept moving, and Roberts directed what he could from inside, his authority resting less on his daily presence than on the legend the streets had built around him. Power and the four-corner hustlers had always belonged as much to a name as to a man, and Roberts' name carried even when his body could not. When he came home in the summer of 1994, the trouble that had always trailed him was waiting, and this time it would not end with another dropped charge. Within weeks of his release, the allegations against Roberts moved from drug cases into something far stranger. Police and federal agents claimed that Roberts tried to buy a LAWS anti-tank rocket, offering cash and drugs for it in what he believed was a deal with drug dealers and what was in fact a sting run by ATF agents. By the account authorities gave, Roberts grew suspicious before any arrest could happen and slipped away. They said he wanted the rocket to destroy the District 11 police station on West Harrison Street, revenge for the raids that had broken up his operations in the projects. The same motive attached to an earlier rumor that he meant to blow up the same station once he came home. People on the street insisted none of it was true and that the police had built the case to put him away. Whatever the truth, Roberts went into hiding for the rest of 1994. The accusation landed on a man who had spent his whole career at war with the police. Roberts had fought officers with his hands when they came in numbers, had been suspected in the wounding of one detective and the shooting of another, and had built a name as someone the department could not control. Whether or not he ever reached for a rocket, his record made the charge easy for the public to believe and easy for his defenders to call a frame. He was in hiding when the killing happened that this story is named for. On July 25th, 1994, Walter Wheat sat in an Oldsmobile on West Chicago Avenue near Chicago and Hamlin, waiting for friends inside a clothing store, when a shirtless 17-year-old named Bobby Cooley walked up to the car and fired 2 shots into his back and the back of his head. The founder of the Four Corner Hustlers, the man whose code had defined the gang for a quarter century, the man who had handed Roberts the nation, was dead at 43, killed by one of his own. Cooley was caught by September, charged with a second shooting as well, and sent to prison for life. The street split immediately over a question that has never been settled. Many said Angelo Roberts was behind the murder, that the handoff of power in 1992 had not been enough, and that a struggle for full control had ended with Wheat in the morgue. Many others said the opposite with equal conviction, that Roberts loved Wheat, followed the original beliefs more faithfully than anyone, and had no part in the death of the man who raised his wife and blessed his rise. The case against Cooley went no further than Cooley. Roberts was never officially tied to the murder. The chronology complicates the simplest version of the story. Roberts already led the Four Corner Hustlers by 1992, 2 years before Wheat died, and he had taken the nation with Wheat's blessing rather than over his objection. If a power struggle reached Wheat in 1994, it reached a founder who had already stepped aside. What the record holds is an allegation and its denial, a rumor that fit the violence of the moment, and a counter rumor from people who knew both men with no court and no confession to choose between them. Everything known about how Roberts carried himself cut against the idea that he ordered the hit. He had spent his rise as the most faithful keeper of the founder's beliefs, the disciplined heir Wheat chose precisely because he respected the old code, and the people who pushed back on the rumor pointed to exactly that. The people who believed it pointed to the throne and to how often a crown in Chicago changed hands over a body. The record gives neither side the last word. Roberts did not outlive Wheat by long. At 1 a.m. on January 16, 1995, Chicago police found his body at 7010th and Vernon in the Greater Grand Crossing neighborhood, his throat slashed in the back of a brown Chevrolet. No one was ever caught for it. The theories filled the space the investigation left empty. Some said the police had taken him and killed him, an answer that fit a man who had spent years fighting officers in the street and stood accused of plotting to bomb their station. Others said older Four Corner Hustlers had killed him in revenge for Walter Wheat, which would close the circle of the title in a way no courtroom did. The man accused of killing the father-in-law dying at the hands of the father-in-law's loyalists. Both theories shared the same hole. There's no proof for either. What the street agreed on was how he met it. By the accounts that survive, Roberts was tied up and beaten heavily before he died, and he refused to give the men doing it the satisfaction of watching him suffer. The legend says he died with a smile. At his funeral, his family stood his casket upright so that no one could look down on him, a final statement that the man inside it had stood above other men. Leadership of the Four Corner Hustlers passed to a man whose bloodline ran as deep as the founders. Ray Longstreet, an old school four out of Chicago Avenue and Hamlin, took over the nation after Roberts died. His older brother was Ernest Lavin Longstreet, the man the streets called Le Rod, who created the Devil's Disciples and stood at the root of the Gangster Disciple and Black Disciple legacy, a brother old enough to be Ray's father. Leadership ran in the family the way it had run in Wheats. Longstreet built his operation around West Humboldt Park, on the same ground where the Fords had first planted a heroin trade in 1975, and he made Iowa and Hamlin the capital of it. He ran the gang there like a corporation, workers on the corners around the clock moving crack and heroin, the nearby expressway carrying product on and off the west side. He carried the same hardness as every leader before him, having once faced charges for attacking a correctional officer, a sign that the men who ran this gang did not soften with the title. Longstreet held the nation for a decade. In 2005, federal charges took him off the street and sent him to prison, closing out the last of the leaders who came up in the world Wheat and Roberts built. The gang that survived all of them changed shape in the decades after. Its crews learned to move as money cliques, linking up with the money cliques of other gangs. Even the Gangster Disciples, the Fours, had fought since the people in folks' lines were first drawn. The old leadership thinned out as the men who built the crack empire died or vanished into prison. The exception was Raymond Betts, the shaky Sean who had run the Body Snatchers under Roberts and worn the title of Prince, brought up on charges in 2023 while living in the suburb of Riverdale, one of the last living threads back to the era when Angelo Roberts ran the West Side. Through all of it, the one thing that never faded was the name. The gang Roberts expanded ranks today among the 10 largest in Chicago, spread across the city and into other states, and his name outlived him inside it. Four Corner Hustler crews still call themselves Angelo's Fours, carrying a dead man's first name as their identity decades after his throat was cut in the back of a car. The West Side made him a legend, and a legend is what a place builds when the truth refuses to settle. The record holds the rumor and its denial side by side, and it leaves them there because no one who knew the answer ever put it on paper.